to just start by saying good morning, gentlemen. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited here today at Eton College, or as we in the Labour Party often refer to it as South Slough Secondary Modern. People often ask me why I'm standing for Labour, and looking at you here today, it's rather odd, because when I was your age, I wasn't interested in politics. All I wanted to be was a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor in the NHS, possibly become an academic, and then a distinguished professor of medicine. In fact, I was actually a conservative when I was your age. I was raised in a conservative household. My viewpoint of the world was heavily influenced by my father, who was a huge fan of Margaret Thatcher, and rather shamefully still is. I grew up in a nice part of Glasgow myself. For many of you out there that don't know Glasgow very well, I can assure you there are actually some nice parts, although they tend to be very well hidden. In many ways, I grew up in a bubble. While we were well off, we weren't rich. I did attend what could be called a minor private school, and when my parents were in need, we could afford to go private rather than be treated in the NHS. But my views in the world began to change when I was about 16 years old. At that point in time, it was 1997, and much as it is now, we had a general election looming in the horizon. I just started volunteering at a Marie Curie hospice in Glasgow, in Springburn. For those of you that don't know Springburn, it's one of the most deprived areas of the UK. In terms of teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, alcoholism, low life expectancy, it has astoundingly poor statistics and some of the worst in the UK. Walking from the hospice to the train station every weekend, I was exposed to a different side of life. I'd never before had to skip past discarded needles and condoms in the streets. I'd never before had to cross the road several times just to avoid some of the gangs of men with dogs who would sit menacingly, drinking, sometimes spoiling for a fight. It was there that I first saw the poverty and desperation that some people in our country still have to live with. These were people that had been left behind as the rest of the country advanced. They'd been left in squalor and deprivation. People for whom a job was more of an ancestral memory rather than a realistic ambition in life. I didn't realise it at the time, but for me, that was my first stirrings of a social conscience. I realised that I'd been lucky in life. By a sheer fluke of genetics, I'd been given opportunities denied to the many. I was lucky enough to go back to Springburn recently when I went up to campaign in the Glasgow North East by-election for the Labour Party, and I was astounded by the changes. I was impressed at the new schools, the colleges. I was impressed that the streets were cleaner, they were safer. I saw children playing in clean, new parks with new facilities. And it made me proud to be a Labour Party member and a Labour Party candidate. To me, it embodied everything that I stand for here today. I could see that 12 years of investment hadn't been wasted. Sure Start, New Deal, increased policing, record investment in the NHS. These are all fantastic initiatives, and they have worked. I know that it can be difficult living somewhere like Windsor, because you're unlikely to see the same levels of poverty. You're unlikely to see the same levels of suffering. But I can assure you that even in this constituency, there are some people who even today live in squalor and desperation. This government has committed itself to changing this. These are changes that we commit to making because we stand for the many, not the few. Because we believe that every child has a right to grow up in a clean, safe environment. Because we believe that no matter what your background is, you matter. But we're now entering a new and rather dangerous phase in politics. We all recognise that there are sacrifices to be made. The spectre of cuts falls over local and national government. The Conservatives want to slash public spending. They'll tell you that they will do this in an attempt to fix this broken Britain. They will condemn those families where having a job is now seen as a realistic ambition back to the scrap heap of society. They will ensure that we not only create a new underclass, but that underclass is perpetuated. The truth is that we're all dependent on one another. Their prosperity is our prosperity. In order to grow the economy, to compete internationally, we have to ensure that all young people have the skills and abilities to compete and to contribute to society. We need to ensure that we're investing in the future. Ultimately, this means having a well-trained and highly skilled workforce. And it will allow not just the British workforce, but British companies, British business leaders, British stockholders to all flourish and grow. That is why it is so important that we continue to look at investment. That is why it's so important that we resist the urge to adopt the Conservative slash and burn policies. That is why it's so important for all of you here today that we do not abandon these people. I'd like to go on to another question I'm often asked. I'm often asked by people, do you really think that you can win in Windsor? And my answer is always yes. There are those who will tell you it's pointless standing for Labour in Windsor. They'll tell you that it's impossible for you to win. They're the same people that would have told you it's impossible to give women the vote. It's impossible to put a man in the moon. It's impossible to have a black president of the United States. Impossible, as Muhammad Ali once said, is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it's a dare. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is potential. Impossible is nothing. And I'd like to just leave you with some words of my own. Whatever ambitions you have, in whatever field of life, whether that happens to be business, whether it happens to be sports, academia, or even if you happen to be slightly mentally unstable and decide to pursue a career in politics, then you will have to dream to truly excel in life. You'll have to dream the unthinkable. And gentlemen, the greater the dream, the greater the sacrifices that you will have to make to achieve that dream. The greater the sacrifices that you will make, the greater the victory will be. So I'll leave you with an exhortation, gentlemen, to dare to dream. Thank you very much.